Hello, Simon's Universal Music. Here we are for another interview. Today I am here with Vinnie Peculiar, who's a singer-songwriter. He's worked with some incredible musicians and comes from an amazing part of the country where I used to live. So, Vinnie, thank you ever so much for your time. It's really great to see you. And the first question I'm going to ask is, how did it start with your getting your name?
Yeah, the name Vinny Peculiar is like an amalgamation of the term funny peculiar, which some people thought my songs were a bit funny peculiar. If you know that, I'm sure you know that expression.
Yeah.
And there's a song by Simon and Garfunkel which I always loved, which is a very, very gentle, lilting folk song called "A Most Peculiar Man." It's a very dark and moving song, disguised as a light-hearted folk song. So those two strands came together to form Vinnie Peculiar for good or for bad. I mean, you know, you live with these names for a long time, and the longer you crack on.
I think it's absolutely fantastic, and it's very English, and it just has something where it's pretty rock and roll as well, you know?
It was a name I could use solo for solo performances and as band performances. It sort of suits both. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So how did it come to the deal with Ugly Man?
Yeah, I mean, Ugly Man was quite a cult Manchester label, and the guy who runs it is a real kind of maverick entrepreneur and a great guy, actually. A friend of mine called Guy Lovelady. I think he's still involved in music, but I'm not exactly sure how. He's no longer in Manchester, I do know that. That particular label, Ugly Man, were sort of probably most well known for having Elbow. They signed Elbow as well. There were a few other bands from that era that were on Ugly Man. There's a band called Tom Paulin, who I did some work with, actually. Co-produced a couple of albums with them, probably early 2000s.
Then, Vinny, did you move up to Manchester at the time when you were working with them?
No, I worked in mental health in Liverpool, and then I moved to Manchester in 1990, I think. But I worked quite a lot with Liverpool bands in the 90s, and then just did my own thing from the late 90s, and since then it's been, you know, quite a few albums, and every now and again it sort of seems to go up the ladder, but it seems to come back down again, and it's you know, it's always a challenge, and you know, if you feel you've got it in you to keep going, you keep writing, and that's basically what I've done.
And whereabouts are you in Worcester now?
Yeah, I'm in Worcester now. Yeah,
right.
This very minute. I moved away when I was sort of in my mid-20s, and I didn't come back until I was like 55.
Yeah.
I've still got family down here, obviously. So.
Yeah, same. I mean, I lived in Aston Fields for 30 years. So, in fact, I'm going to ask you this now. So, how does it feel being a musician coming from the Midlands? And what does the Birmingham Midlands music scene mean to yourself? Like, what does that city mean to you?
Okay. Well, I suppose when I was young, growing up in Catshill, Bromsgrove, Birmingham was like the mecca of musical excitement for me, a bit like you, getting the train from Bromsgrove, really.
Yeah.
Probably 20 years older, at least, than you are. So I'm in a different kind of era. But for me, all the great sort of Midlands gig experiences I had were initially through kind of people like heavy, you know, the heavier end of the rock thing. I remember seeing Deep Purple, Wishbone Ash were one of my favourite bands. I never saw Black Sabbath, but I did see T-Rex and Gary Glitter when I was really young at Birmingham Town Hall.
Wow. That
was quite exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never did get to see David Bowie, which I regret, but I was kind of like 13, 14 when all that was cracking on.
Yeah.
So David Bowie was a massive early influence on my music, and I also like the folk music side of it. But in terms of Birmingham, it was the Town Hall, the Odeon, and a club called Barbarella's a little bit later on. So when punk rock kind of broke in a big way, I saw quite a few of those kind of bands, from the lesser known punk bands, 999, X-Ray Specs, Chelsea, bands like that. So Birmingham culturally has been important to me because I loved, I like the kind of, the early sort of Led Zeppelin albums, and so the whole Midlands metal thing, I think, got to me and a lot of my friends. I got into different kinds of stuff, like more like the Elvis Costello end of punk. And I love John Cooper Clarke.
I used to work at the Holiday Inn in Bromsgrove, and he was staying there. I think he was like doing something at the Artrix in Bromsgrove, and he was stopping there. And I was doing breakfast one morning there, and I saw him. I was just like, "Oh, I know who that is. I'm going to go over and say hello." So we went over, had a little bit of a chat, and I think I was going to see Noel at the Royal Albert Hall like a week later. So I was talking to him about that. Really amazing bloke. Yeah,
no, his poetry is just something else, and his autobiography is really good.
What I like Vinny as well is obviously coming from the same part of country as yourself. It's just like I've been listening to a lot of your lyrics, and a lot of your lyrics like mention stuff with obviously the buses, places, the Grove, the ditch. It's just so brilliant. When you discover someone like yourself and you can relate to music, I think as a fan, it drives you more in to what you're saying within your songs.
The album you're talking about is when I moved back here in 2015. I wrote an album, that album Return of the Native, which has got some of those kind of Midlands songs, where it's all about the Midlands really, and Midlands songs and Midlands references, the Grove and the Ditch and Detroit Witch and all those songs, the local ones, and the Clifford T. Ward connection as well, that seemed to come out in the song. So Singing School Teacher, that sometimes gets a mention from that album. It's still available.
Yeah, it's really good. Also, with the other side to this, what are your views on your things like Spotify and iTunes and all of that these days? What's your personal opinion on people listening to music?
I think the Spotify thing is what's my opinion? Well, I have done a couple of releases where I said to the distributor, don't bother putting it on Spotify.
Right.
And they said, you're the only musician on our books. And 6 months later, not having it on Spotify, I sold any more of my CDs. They argue that you will get exposure. And people do, in the old days before COVID, you do gigs and it's always important. My gigs are pretty small, so if I'm playing to 60, 70 people, I want to sell a few CDs, and at the end of the night, you turn into a market trader, and quite often people turn around and say, "Oh no, thanks, I've got Spotify, or I'll just stream it." And that's just the change that we've gone through. It's particularly tough if you're trying to make it as a musician who's actually funding your lifestyle as a musician. Most musicians I know are not full-time musicians unless they are deeply involved in the world of covers music, which I have been on and off throughout the years, but I also, until my early 50s, had at least a job beyond music. I couldn't.
Yes.
It's very hard to make it pay for everything now, particularly nowadays with the revenue streams that are quite restrictive, really. I don't think it's the worst thing. I just think the revenue you can have a lot of listens, and I think historically, that amount of listens, if you turn that into radio play, you'd expect more from the radio system than you would from the Spotify system.
Do you think radio is going to get really important for a lot of new bands over the next 2 or 3 years to try and help them?
Radio's always been important. It's a tough one to get, though. I mean, radio. I've had some good radio over the years, but it's not something you can guarantee or rely on. Six Music, it's okay. You can get played on Six Music. People get played on Six Music, but getting onto a playlist seems like an art in itself. Tom Robinson, I've known for a number of years.
Yes.
And he's always supportive of my stuff. So he's a nice guy and plays it. So I've been down to do sessions with him, but a long time ago, not a recent one. Most of my recent connections has been with BBC Introducing. But it's quite nice. It's nice to get regular airplay because it keeps people in mind of who you are. But there's luck involved, and also there's there's a complex sort of PR machine behind most of what we get to hear. It's and it's not always easy to work out the best PR for yourself, really. I mean, for me, I seem to spend so much time making records, and then it's a whole new job to promote them, and that's not something that I'm always that crazy about. I mean, I've just had sort of 8 weeks more or less off social media just to give my head a break from it all, just because it's kind of nice not to do it sometimes. I mean, I'm just finishing off an album now. So what's happened with COVID is everything's on hold. So
sure,
it would normally be finished now because I found a studio I really like working in. It's called Future Primate Studios. It's in Hagley, and that's really good. So we're just finishing. I've probably got 6 more tracks to mix, maybe 5 at his studio. The other stuff has been done in bits at different studios. Different producer friends of mine are doing some stuff. So it's I don't know, 12 songs or so. I think it's 12, might be less, might be 11. The theme of it is art and artists. It's quite a noisy affair, sort of thrashy guitars and So I mean, the artists in question are Francis Bacon, David Hockney, Grayson Perry, Jackson Pollock, people like that, Rothko, various people that I've enjoyed going to see their exhibitions in various art galleries over the years. It's like a noisy rock album, really, and I found it over the last few years helpful to have sort of kind of concepts and themes for different records. So I had that Bromsgrove, I had that Midlands, Worcestershire album. I did an album set in a fictitious psychiatric hospital. So that's another concept album. And the last album was kind of a sort of angry, and some of that was a reaction to the political chaos of Brexit. And then this album is artists. It's got a couple of really kind of belting hard rock anthems on it. So hopefully they're going to work. New drummer Joe Singh from Worcester. He's playing on quite a bit of it. He's a drummer, but most of the rest of it, I've just done. So bass and drums and all. Other instruments have all been done here, which is the joy of modern recording. In some ways, you can put the basics down at home and then take all those files into a studio and create a bigger drama with better equipment there.
Are you itching at the bit to get out on the road and start playing again to people?
Yeah, very much so. We've got to. Since I've been back in Worcester last year, I finally sorted out a band So I'm going to do some live band gigs up in Wirral and the various other northern venues seem to know me a little bit better than ones down here.
Right, okay.
So it's a brand new band, so hopefully we can play as many times as we can once we know we can, sort of thing. I mean, the 24th of July, I think, is this gig I've got on the Wirral at a place that I liked, a really nice club called Thornton Hoof Village Club. And there's a few others that are sort of being confirmed, but no organised tours have been confirmed as yet.
Are you going to come up to Newcastle and play?
I played the Clooney recently, about a year ago, I think. A couple of years ago, I was supporting Eric, Reckless Eric.
Right, okay.
So I was up there. I've played the Sage Gateshead, I think.
Yeah, that's just down the road.
They've got a really nice venue there. I haven't played it on my own. I think I opened. I can't remember who I opened for. Might have been Nils Lofgren.
Right. So I suppose we have to get on to Parlour Flame, and obviously, you know, talking about that. And with being the fan that I am, obviously, of Bonehead's old band, I suppose Bonehead has had an influence on me since I was like 14, 15 years old. And then to be in your band playing with yourself and to make an incredible album. I've been listening to it lots. It's amazing. So tell us about that experience with working with Bonehead.
Okay, well, how did I get to know Bone? Let me think. Oh yeah, in 2006, I made another album with some well-known people. Mike Joyce from the Smiths.
Yes.
And Craig Gannon, who used to be in the Smiths live show. He's a great guitar player from Manchester.
Yeah.
Andy Rourke, the Smiths bass player, was in the band, but he left not long before we made the album. But anyway, we made an album. It's called The Fallen Rides of Vinnie Peculiar. And Mike Joyce knew Bonehead quite well. I really liked the album that I did. And we met up a couple of times. And he came to see us play. And then he ended up managing the band, me and the band, the Vinnie Peculiar band of the time. It was about 2008, maybe 2009. No, 2008 or something. And then Karen, who was our bass player, dropped. We had, I think, 5 or 6 dates in Scandinavia. Like a little mini tour we're all excited about, and Karen couldn't do it, so Bonehead basically learned the set on the plane.
No way.
And blagged it, and we had such fun, you know. We played these shows, and then he joined the band then, and then we probably did 2 or 3 small UK tours. This was kind of the social media thing wasn't as kind of proactive back in 2007 or 8 or whatever it was.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but, you know, they were smallish venues, and so we had Mike Joyce on drums, Bonehead on bass, me on guitar and vocals, and a guy called Ben Knott, who is a great guy and keyboards player, Mancunian. He was on keyboards. Right. So that's how I met. That's how I met Bone.
How did you feel? You know what? I'm going to work with a brilliant musician, and things are going to be cool.
It just felt normal to me, you know. I mean, I wasn't. I was a really big Smiths fan. Yeah. But Oasis, you know, I wasn't a massive Oasis fan. I liked some of their like stomping anthems, you know, rock and roll style stuff like that. Like the first album, but it didn't have the impact on me that it did have on a lot of people. Great band, great live band. But you know, for me, it's just a really someone who becomes a good friend, who's a really good musician. And but you know, I mean, I suppose it's always interesting hearing people's stories. You know, so I'd often, be chatting to Bone about, what happened and the drama. And but for me and Bone, it was just more like, we'll do this thing. And when we started, he had a great little studio set up in the basement of his house in Hale in Manchester. And so one of the joys for me making that Parlour Flames album was, it didn't start off as an album. We thought we'd just see how we got on. So it was going to be like an EP. But we ended up doing a whole lot more than that. On Spotify, it says, it was much more collaborative than Vinnie Peculiar does the words and Bonehead does the music.
Yeah.
Both did. Bonehead did most of the production on that record. He was absolutely brilliant. But a lot of the playing is very shared,
Yeah.
And I think Bone did most of the bass on that. I only played bass on a couple of tracks. He did most of the bass, but the guitars are very shared. One of the great things for me was there was no pressure to finish. There was no real studio costs. I could just go to, I could spend half a day if I wanted, re-singing, tracking, getting the vocals how I wanted them, playing loads of guitars. And, we had a lot of fun. We actually even went to different studios to try and get the guitar sounds right. It wasn't like it was basically just a basement. It was a great space to work in and a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And that's usually the thing. If it feels right and it's fun. I always wondered why we didn't do a second album. I had prepared stuff for that, but these things have a way of fading away. And one of the other problems is if you're a band like that, we had some great players in the band. So
absolutely.
Our drummer is a great friend of mine, and he's black. He drums with Black Grape.
Wow.
He steps with Happy Mondays. Badly Drawn Boy. He's a good player. The bass player plays with Badly Drawn Boy and Dove Splinter Projects. We were signed to Cherry Red Records, who are a great label, but they're not like the kind of label that pays for you to go on tour.
No.
So you have to make every gig pay, and you get a bit bogged down. So that's probably why, unless it sort of half took off, but not really, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So we sold a few records, but the demand wasn't really there to continue it. We were rehearsing at Salford Lads Club, which was again an iconic Manchester place. It's famous because of Smith's album cover and Smith's connections. But what happened after that? So after that band died about 2009, and then I just mostly did solo gigs after that for a bit. And Bone and me always said, "Oh, one day we'll have to do something together."
If you do, believe me, I think it will be amazing. When I've listened to a lot of your music, the guitars sound absolutely brilliant. How often do you play? How often do you keep doing it?
Well, in lockdown, every day.
Yes.
I do. I suppose I do play most days now. I haven't always, but most days I play now. Yeah, play some acoustic or I got a little electric practice amp down here, and
right.
If I'm bored watching telly, I end up playing guitar instead of watching telly. That kind of thing.
Can you remember getting your first one?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I got it from George Clay Music in Birmingham in probably 1970 or something. I just started playing at the church, because we were big on the church.
Sure.
Way back, Methodist church. My granddad was a preacher. My dad was an organist, that sort of thing.
So what do you play any other musical instruments?
Well, I do most of the pianos on my records and the keyboards. I can play I've played mandolin on a few albums. I can play a mandolin, but I'm not really that proficient at it. Ukulele, I can bash out a few things on as well. I use that sometimes live, my solo stuff, just to break it up. It's great for a couple of songs, but you wouldn't want the whole gig on a ukulele. So yeah, that's about me. I'm a pretty lousy drummer. I have a go. Usually in practice rooms when the drummer's late, I'll sit down and everyone will tell me to get off. But you know, I'm actually kind of the more music you do, you kind of you listen to various tracks and you hear drum parts. Drum parts I can do now, sort of okay. I'm okay with, and that's through using computers to work out which bits of the kit you want where and when you want your breaks and what a fill is. And computer recordings helped. So yeah.
I was listening to an interview that you did with these two young lads, and you were talking about the song Imagine that you wrote. There's
a demo version of it. It's available now on an album called Peculiarities, which is just some old tracks I put out last year. I've reissued the first album recently. That's called Gone. And then the album before that is called Peculiarities, and it's got lots of outtakes. It's got some Parlour Flames outtakes.
The reason why I talk about that is because obviously with that man and the influence that he's had on so much in music, I just want to ask what your personal opinion is of Lennon and what he means to you, Vinny.
Yeah, I think John Lennon's really important. I read a book of his letters a few years ago, which I didn't realise he was quite such a prolific, articulate, and interesting, and very flawed and very human. And yeah, I think he's important. He's an important figure. I think his politics were incredibly powerful, and he was seeing out things outside the box, and the establishment didn't like it. He was ahead of his time in lots of ways.
Vinny, thank you very much for your time. It has really been absolutely amazing. And yeah, we should catch up soon.